Welcome to this session. My name is Oliver Greff, and I want to introduce Nicolai Schoenteich. Nico is well known in the SAP developer community. Nico is developer advocate, and his focus is on BTP topics as well as web development, and of course UI5. And one thing I know about Nico is that he studied psychology. So he should know about the effect of things on mental state, or I don't know, of users, of developers. And one thing I can say is that one thing which has an effect on my mental state is performance, or I should say the lack of performance. So let's see how far we can push performance. Nico.
Very smooth transition. Yeah, applause for that. Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Nico. I'm a developer advocate at SAP. I'm somewhere on this page also. Yeah, here we are. So as Oliver said, I focus on BTP topics, mainly UI5 and also more recently CAP. So a little disclaimer, I mean, we all know this is about performance, but a little disclaimer, I'm actually not going to talk about UI5 as the framework today. I'm going to talk about the UI5 Web Components mainly. So if that surprises you, you can leave the room now, but yeah, or you just be polite and stay here. But anyway, we're not going to talk about UI5, the framework, but we're going to use the UI5 Web Components. So the title of this talk is how far can we push performance, right? And the real question is not how far can we push performance, because I mean, we could all just write plain HTML with unbeaten performance, but I mean, that wouldn't be, very nice for everyone involved. So as Oliver said, I once studied psychology, and I like to focus on the user and also on the developer experience. So the real question is, how far can we push performance while still making it enjoyable for everyone involved? Because writing HTML and CSS is maybe not the solution. All right, we have heard in the keynote already. By the way, I won't have any slides, so don't look at the screen. Just watch me or listen to me for now. We've heard in the keynote already that UI5 as in the framework will have the module Bootstrap very soon, and that is fantastic, and that will give us a huge performance benefit. But let's say we have a scenario where we don't use UI5. We use the UI5 Web Components and some very minimal basic setup, for example, using Vite. Right, so we're very close to HTML, but we still have a nice little web server, dev server running, and we can use all the NPM packages that we want. And in that scenario, I built something that maybe we can use, maybe not, but I will share it anyways. So let's say we use the UI5 Web Components more or less on our own. And that's what I recently did for a side project of mine. And for me personally, I think that's kind of the sweet spot in that, question that I proposed in the beginning, like how far can we push it while still having it, easy to understand and simple to maintain and things like that. So I have this project right here, and it's a list report object page-like thing. So I built it with UI5 Web Components, as I said. So this is not an actual Fiori Elements app, but you can click on one of the items and you have the flexible column layout and all of that. And I'll just quickly do a lighthouse test with that, just to gain some credibility here. So, I mean, this app looks like UI5 and it behaves like it, but it's pretty fast. So I personally think that's pretty cool, and that's a very decent score. So let's have a look at how I did this, right? And by the way, I have all of this in a GitHub repo. If you want to check it out, what's the name? Web Components data binding. Yeah, okay. Here we go. So I created this repo. We're not really going to watch the repo now, but you can basically all the content that I talk about here is in this repo as well. So just Google UI5 Web Components data binding example, and it's on SAP samples. All right, so let's have a look at what I did. Right, so I have a very basic Vite application. So let's just look at the Vite part here. I have a very basic Vite application. it's just one HTML file and one JS file. So I said at the beginning, writing plain HTML isn't fun, but it can be pretty cool if you kind of enhance it a little. So I built this thing that I call vanilla data binding, right? And data binding is something that we all use and love with UI5. But what if we want to use it with plain HTML, like do a list binding, property binding, IHN, this kind of thing? So I quickly want to show you this data bind property thing here. So let's use this one right here. So I have a button, right? This is one of the two buttons where you could change the color of the apple. And I have this data bind property thing here that I assign, and I say it's IHN and just change apple color. So IHN is the name of the model, and change apple color is just the key in one of those translation files. So if we go to IHN and then DE, for example, we have change apple color here. So that's just the translation that we have. And you might be, what? Like that looks like a UI5 data binding, but it's in an HTML file. And data bind property, what kind of thing is that? So with every HTML element, you can just set a data attribute, and then you can access it via the data set attribute in JavaScript. So I will just demonstrate that real quick. So in this app right here, I can just give a query parameter and say language DE, and that just translates all the things on the left like to German. So the internationalization thing is very similar to UI5. And then if we go back, we not only have IHN, but we like with property bindings, right? Like bind one element to one kind of piece in the model. But we also have list bindings. So I can give a data bind list here, and then have a supermarket model. And in there, I want the products array kind of bind it to that list that I have. And that's just a UI5 table. And what this data bind list thing does, again, just my own custom library, and we can have a look at it in a second if you want. It just duplicates this row, this UI5 table row, again, a UI5 Web Component. It just duplicates that according to the data on the model. And then you can do property bindings kind of inside the nested list binding. So we have a list binding here, and inside, just like in UI5, really, you can say that it's supposed to display the name inside this one product. So kind of a nested thing here. So product is an array, and then it duplicates it according to the data on the model. And then this one line item just displays the name, a property in one array item. So I can also I can add a new thing here. I can add a new line item via an API that I provided. And I can also change data, like I just changed the color of the apple. And the way you do that or kind of use this package is pretty simple. So you just import from the vanilla data binding library, you import IHN model and the JSON model. So, I kind of leaned towards what we already know with UI5. And again, I'm not trying to propose any alternative or say that UI5 did anything bad performance-wise. That's just me playing around and experimenting and reaching a lighthouse score of 96, 97 while still having a UI5-like feeling. So all that's what I want to share here with you today. I'm not saying that we should all go ahead and use this. This is really more of a personal learning journey that I share with you. So I import these IHN models and the JSON model, and the way I use it, I just say, all right, give me a new IHN model. And then I can say that I set it to true, which is kind of, I want to initialize it myself because I want to await it in the next line, because then for the JSON model, I actually want to populate the JSON model with IHN data. And by the way, this is how you can access the data on the model. So you just reference the model name and then say data. So you don't need any get property or get data, mechanisms. You can just go into the object and get it. Yeah, so that's the vanilla data binding thing that I did. Do we have any questions on that? I mean, it's a really, thing that I just did on my own, but let's cover first questions on that before I kind of continue with other solutions talking about performance. Yeah.
In your example, you showed that you gave a name to the button, but button has more than one property. How do you fill the other properties?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got the mic here. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah. Where's the button? So, right. So the button here, I So the thing, how that works. So the data bind property thing, and again, we're just, this was just what I made up. So the solution I came up with is that you can that as the first parameter, you specify the name of the model. There's no default models, by the way. Models always have a name. Then you give the key, and then optionally you can give a third parameter, which is the default is text content, right? So that's the default. So the default is to put the value as a text content in that attribute, and that's what happened here. But I could also, as for example, with the title, so the UI5 shell bar provides an attribute called primary title, right? And that's what I did here. So here I said the supermarket model, and then the name of the supermarket should be the primary title, right? Not the text content, but the primary title, because that's just an attribute that the UI5 Web Component provides. And by the way, we could also do multiples. So we can put this in an array like that, like array like still in a string, but sort of, array like, and then give it another like IHNN, for example, and then come up with something else. So we can have multiple property bindings on one element as well. Yeah, good question. And if you're curious, to see the vanilla data binding, like all of it, I put it in this repo right here. It's under extensions, vanilla data binding, and then I came up with this whole README where that's how I spent my nights recently, writing this. So if someone checks it out, that would be awesome. Yeah. All right. Any more questions about the custom data binding with this very minimal application setup? All right, we can still talk about questions later. So as you probably figured out by now, I could talk about this data binding library that I've built for like 20 minutes or 20 hours. And I'm happy to have a chat with you, in the hall later. But that's actually not what makes this application perform so well. It's really not. It's more the UI5 Web Components and their compatibility, their flexibility, their ease of use, and their power that just makes it even possible to have a very minimal setup with Vite, for example, just use UI5 Web Components and have a performance of in the 90s. Like that's really all the performance part that I have to share with you. The rest was just me, sharing what I did in my free time. But so I have this Vite application here, up here. But during my research, I actually found out that another framework, which is Vue, has a very, very similar data binding implementation to UI5 and to what I did in the vanilla data binding application. So if you think what you just saw with the list bindings and all that, just using a very minimal setup is cool, go check out Vue, because they have a very, very similar implementation and you don't rely on my library, which is probably a good thing. So if we check out the app view right here, we can see that we have, again, this is sort of a property binding as well on the primary title. So I built the same exact application in Vue as well. So if you want to check it out. So this is how you do a property binding on the primary title. So very similar. And then what we can also do is we have this template syntax here. So this is how you bind one property like inside the text content with Vue. And then you also have this, where is it? Where's the list? Here's the list. So you can have these v-for loops, which are basically the same thing as a list binding. So this renders as a list as well. So we say copy this specific element for this array, like for the product in supermarket product, and that does the same thing. So this is Vue's implementation of that. So I think that's pretty cool. Right. So as you probably figured out by now, I didn't show you any new cutting edge technology, nothing very fancy or specific, nothing groundbreaking. But I do have a few key takeaways. And this is as close to a slide as we're going to get today. So key takeaways. The UI5 Web Components are awesome. They're super lightweight and very performant. Like that was the only reason how I could, implement this application with such a good score. It's because we have the UI5 Web Components. All the sugar I put on top with the data binding, that's really not what makes it perform well. It's the UI5 Web Components. So if you haven't checked them out, please do so. Also, UI5 is an incredibly powerful framework. I put a lot of effort into this, and to be honest, that didn't even scratch the surface of what UI5 can do. So, props to the team. And then the third key takeaway is really just try out new stuff and experiment. Like I learned so much during building this. I can just encourage you to not just do your projects, do what you're told to do, but check out the SAP communities, come up with a project, like contribute, just engage with everyone. I mean, being here is a good first step. So if you see something inspiring today, just talk to whoever built it and come up with your own stuff. And you might learn a lot along the way. So yeah, that's it for the talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Nico. I'm sure you have questions.
Thanks. So what's the performance score of your app in Vue?
Good question. It's worse. It's 85 around. I mean, we can try. So I can say npm run Vue dist. I think I built it recently, so it should be there. Yeah, so if we refresh, you don't see any difference. It's the exact same app, but it's built with Vue. Yeah, it's like last time I checked, I think it was 85. So it was a little worse, because I mean, it's always, the abstraction layers as they, grow and continue, you always have more stuff that you load and more overhead. Yeah, there you go. So it's 84. Yeah, that's why I went with the most minimal approach, built the application, and then kind of added my, things on top that I like for, as I said, experience, yeah, developer and user experience. Yeah, and this is where kind of, where I ended with this sweet spot, as I name it, but it's really just a personal opinions.
Good. Who's next? There was one other question earlier.
All right, so I have a question prepared in case this happened anyway. I built this application in, so I started, I'll share the source code real quick. So it's just one file. Let's close that. So it's just one file, and as you can see, it's built in JavaScript. And let me just, so we can go for a property. Let's go for the JSON model implement. So this is where the JSON model just extends the base model. So who could think of any reason why I would build this, start out in TypeScript and then realize that's not for me and then go back to JavaScript? Because this is really not a common thing to do now these days. So who could think of any reasons why I moved back to JavaScript? Yeah, there you go.
So performance.
Yeah, he said performance. No, actually it's not, because if you just write TypeScript, you compile or transpile it to JavaScript anyway, so that's the same thing at the end of the day. So the real reason was that I wanted to force myself to write proper documentation, because that's something I haven't really done in the past. And as I said, it's all about learning new stuff, right? So I wanted to use JSDoc, as you can see here. So I really forced myself, with every method, even if it's just a private one that I just use internally here. I wanted to force myself to really write decent documentation and use JSDoc. And then with TypeScript and JSDoc, I just found myself doing the same thing twice, defining all the types and then, documenting all the types again. So that's why I said, okay, let's just use JavaScript and use JSDoc. And then we can still use TypeScript to generate the type definitions. So if in the dist folder here, you can see that I have these type definitions. So the DTS file is still there, because TypeScript can actually handle JSDoc and create the type definitions like dynamically on the fly, which is super cool. So, and also the advantage of just using plain JavaScript is that I can debug right in the source. So I, build my app and I see a feature missing, and I can just go into the source, create a new function, and kind of I'm right there. I get the error message. I get the line where where I get an error, and that is all a bit. There's like there's more happening in between if you have a transpile step. But we all get still the developer experience pretty cool, because you get code completion, or at least you get the suggestions and the type suggestions because of this DTS file. So that's why I moved back to JavaScript. But again, for an application, I would always go with TypeScript. But for when you're building a library, I think JavaScript, that's pretty cool, because you're right in the source. Yeah. All right. Any more questions?
No more questions. Great. So thanks, Nico. Thanks for sharing your journey. Thanks for pushing for performance. Thank you very much.
Thanks.